Hey, thanks everyone for coming this afternoon. I've got to be recorded for some reason, and I haven't got any pockets, so that's why I'm holding this little gadget and waving it around. I said to most of you here before that we're going to try and do it with PowerPoint and a couple of short DVD clips, but if it's too painful to watch or hear or anything, just tell me and we'll switch it off and we'll just get a bit more casual. But what I want to do this afternoon is, I guess, have a bit more of an in-depth look at this whole issue of human trafficking and slavery, why it is that Hagar and Tear Fund and a lot of other organisations are so passionate about stopping it. And I also want to look at how we can respond to it. I want to show you in a little bit more detail, I guess, the hows and the whys and the what of what Hagar is actually doing. But hopefully through that, maybe start to challenge you guys as to how you can respond, because I think one of the big things that God started to speak to me when I started on this journey of getting serious about Jesus was he spoke a scripture to me from Isaiah 58 verse 6 to 12, and talking a lot about, it's a command from God where he's calling us to not only feed the poor but to free the oppressed and set those in chains free. And I sort of think as Christians we're often very good at helping the poor. We haven't maybe historically been as brave and as good about stopping oppression, and yet, you know, to me it's blindingly obvious God's calling us all to do something, but the question is what is our response? What's your response? It's going to be really different to what mine is, really different to what Murray's is, really different to the person next door to you. So I'm kind of hoping that through the stuff we talk about today, some of those buttons might start to get pushed. I also want to have time for questions as well. So if you've got questions, if they're absolutely burning, stick your hand up and I'll answer them then and there. Otherwise, it'd be really great if we can have questions and maybe a bit more of a discussion at the end. I've got a presentation planned, but I'm really happy to go off on a tangent or leave that behind and do something completely different, or just tell you lots of stories. Great. Okay, so we're going to get started just with a short clip for you to watch. Hopefully it will come through and it will be okay. Someone said it's easier if you put your sunglasses on.
Cambodia is a developing country, and so because of that, you know, there's certain infrastructures that are not as tight as they should be and could be, and that leaves a door open for foreign pedophiles who come to this country because they know they can get away with things they would never get away with in their own country.
The foreign pedophiles, a good number of them who are caught, we find that they have criminal records in their home countries for similar offenses. They come from the U.S., they come from Europe, they come from Australia, Canada, really all over. And these are men that are pretty hardcore. They know that there are those who are looking for them and trying to stop them, but even that doesn't stop them from making the trip around the world to a place like Cambodia.
It's not all foreigners. They are the ones that stand out, and they are the ones that get the publicity. But they are probably 5% of what goes on here.
In Cambodia, prostitution is a normal part of life and has been for a long time, which has resulted in the largest group of customers being Cambodian men and other Asian men. Many of these establishments cater specifically to Asian men. These karaoke bars, the massage parlors, the brothels.
It happens all over the world, so in some ways Cambodia is no different. I think one of the reasons is that there's generational trauma, and then there's generational, for some of these girls in the family, generational sex work. So it's become more normalised for some of the younger girls, especially some of the girls from Vietnamese families, where some of them are third generation. So it's kind of been like a normalised type of, this is what will happen to someone in the family. So one of the girls, for the honour of the family, will go into this kind of work.
I've read reports over the years that have said that as many as 75% of Cambodian men lose their virginity to prostitutes. And when I've spoken to young men and women here about that, I've yet to find anybody to disagree with that. And so because it's something that's so normal in the culture, the line between prostitution of adults and prostitution of children, it's not a big line. If you're okay with one, then it's likely that you're going to be okay with the other. What's the real difference between, in their minds, many of them, between the prostitution of an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old, for example, or a 16-year-old?
They have a saying in Cambodia that boys are gold and girls are white cloth. So a white cloth gets dirty easily, a gold you can make shiny. So culture says that girls are not valuable. So there's a number of different reasons why in Cambodia this is an issue at the moment.
What we generally find are families that are making money from this industry. And in this industry, you often find husbands, wives, even grandparents, generations that have been making money by running an establishment where prostitution is the main source of income.
All our girls that come into us have been from very poor families, Cambodian families. And so when the girls are offered some money, or the families are offered money, then it's very tempting to push the girls into this.
I grew up in a village named Kapiti. Whenever a customer came and wanted to get service, the brothel owner would come and collect us goods. He'd give us little money and keep the rest for himself.
Kapiti is this village that there's no other reason that a foreigner would go there other than to access children for sex. There's no restaurant that would draw people there. There is no coffee or any shop that sells anything that would draw any foreigner to come there, other than the reputation that it has developed over the last more than a decade of selling its young children to foreign sex offenders for money. So it's a community that has profited from sexually exploiting the children in that community.
It was awful. Every week I'd have to service 3 to 4 customers or more. Most of the men were between 20 to 50 years old. Some of them would be violent with me and hit me. I always felt like I had no value since I was involved in this.
I just wish that people who come here to abuse children would understand the life sentence they are imposing on somebody else for 15 minutes of pleasure for them. Our kids, they will carry this for the rest of their lives.
That's the unfortunate reality of a lot of what's going on in Cambodia. That video featured 2 pretty remarkable Kiwi women, Sue Hannah and Sue Taylor, who hail from Te Awamutu, and they were actually the 2 Kiwis that they've been in Phnom Penh for 10 years. They went over there to set up Hagar's first aftercare home, the one I talked about this morning, specifically for young girls, and they've done a huge amount, not only within Hagar, but within the whole non-profit organisation sector in Cambodia, training other organisations in how to reach these kids, training them how to reach them properly and well so they won't end up being trafficked again and again and again. They're pretty remarkable women. What I'd like to do, just before we dive into sort of responses, is just to clarify some terminology, because I think sometimes we hear about human trafficking, we hear about slavery, and it's like, what are they? So when we're talking about human trafficking, this is kind of an official definition. It says it's the movement of someone by deception or coercion or force for the purposes of exploitation. And the key thing that will identify an activity as whether it is trafficking or whether it's smuggling or some other illegal activity is the purpose of exploitation. That is the underlying difference. It is really, really common for people to be trafficked by deception. I was in Vietnam in October. I went over to do some training with our staff and ended up working with a young girl called Tien who was 18. And when she was 16, she'd had a very sort of broken childhood. She was being passed from relative to relative. Her mother didn't want her to live with her. And when a woman in her town said to her, Tien, don't work for your uncle, I can get you a much better job in a restaurant in China, she was like, sounds good. So the woman told her all about this restaurant, how great it was going to be, and she took her into China but sold her into a brothel. And this poor kid not only got sold into a brothel, she then got sold as a wife, because one of the major markets, I guess for want of a better word, for trafficking in Vietnam is for wives for Chinese men. One of the unpublicised results of China's one-child policy is the fact that now there's a generation of men who want to marry and there's not enough women. So every week throughout all of northern Vietnam, throughout Hanoi, there are wife markets that are held, illegal wife markets where Chinese families come over and they bid and they buy wives for their sons. So this poor kid at 16 got sold to be a wife. She locked herself in the bathroom. That house she wouldn't come out, so that family sold her at another market because she was a bad wife. And she got bought by another family. Eventually, she was allowed out. They used to lock her away when visitors came around. And she figured out, and this is one of the most remarkable things that I've come to learn about Hagar's clients, this incredible strength and determination to survive. And she figured out right very early that the only way she was going to get out of this was if she managed to make her family trust her. So she did everything they wanted. She started learning Chinese. And one day she was left on her own with a couple of neighbours. She told them her story. 7 weeks later, her family had shut her in the house. They were all off at a market buying food for a big festival. And these neighbours turned up in their car, they picked her up and they took her to the Vietnamese border. And then she eventually came to Hagar. But she's a classic case of someone who's been deceived. She was promised a great job in a restaurant, and instead she had a horrific 15 months until she managed to get home. In a lot of places as well, probably more sort of Eastern Europe and also places like America, unfortunately in the United States, the use of coercion and force is probably more predominant, where abductions and kidnapping are quite common. So when we talk about slavery, a lot of times the terminology is interchangeable, and if someone's talking about trafficking, they're talking about slavery. Really, the process of being turned into a slave is what human trafficking is. So slavery is the state of being owned by another person. You have no rights. You are somebody else's property. You've been turned into a commodity. I briefly mentioned stats this morning. You can hear all sorts of ranges of numbers as to how many people are in slavery. Because it is so illegal, it's pretty difficult to get a head count. But the most reputable source comes from the International Labour Organisation. It's probably a very conservative source, and they estimate more than 21 million. You might hear figures of 27 million, 36 million. Whatever it is, it's still pretty horrific. Just down at the bottom here, this is an industry, an illegal industry, that makes a horrific amount of money. In 2014, the profits from the buying and selling of humans was estimated to be more than $150 billion. 99 billion of that came from sex work, from sexual exploitation. So there's a huge amount of money when people are trying to go, well, why is human trafficking? How can people sell other people? Because there's an incredible amount of money in it. If you've ever seen the documentary Nefarious, there's an interview there with a guy that used to be a trafficker, and his comment was, well, Yeah, the first couple of times it's pretty difficult, but when you realise how much money you're getting, you just kind of don't worry about it anymore. And I think that's been something I've found quite difficult to get my head around, trying to understand this issue, as when I look at it and see people and children and how can you sell kids and how can you do that, they're not looking at it like that. They're looking at it as a business transaction that's going to get a lot of money. One of the big differences with slavery now and slavery as it used to be perhaps back in Wilberforce's time is the value of a human life on a dollar term has really changed. Nowadays, apparently, it costs about $90 to buy a slave. Back in Wilberforce's day, the equivalent amount was about $140,000. So now people, they're really disposable. You pay more for your phone, you pay more for your sunglasses. So if somebody's not working, just like we do with any other commodity, get rid of it, get another one.
Is that in America that you pay that much?
No, that's apparently an international figure. Yeah. But this is one of the best definitions of trafficking that I've come across, where it says that human trafficking, it's the exploitation of someone's vulnerability. And I think if you're trying to unpack reasons as to why trafficking is so bad, what's happening, how can I do something, what should I do, you kind of need to understand, I guess, what trafficking is. So if I was to ask you guys, like, why do you think trafficking is so bad at the, currently? Why do you think there might be more people in slavery than any other time? What are some of the reasons that may be that have caused this? Yeah? Yeah, big difference between rich and poor. What else? Yeah?
Difference between religions, for example. Islam tends to encourage slavery.
Yeah.
That sort of thing more than Christianity, for example.
Yeah, great. So differences in religion. Yep.
Population explosion.
Yep, population explosion. Anything else? There's 3 really good reasons. Here are some more. First point there says that traffickers prey upon civil wars, upon unrest, upon economic downturn, and upon natural disasters. And I haven't done an analysis as to see whether there's been more of all that stuff in the last century than at any other time, but there's certainly been a lot. And this is one of the horrible things, and I know these guys in Tier Fund would know this all too well, is that when we hear of a disaster like the Haiti earthquake or the Nepal earthquake, it's not just bad enough that there's a disaster and people's lives are ruined. Traffickers hear that. They flood to those areas and they take as many kids and displaced people as they can. It's a horrible fact, but that's what happens. They go to areas where there are civil unwars. They go to areas where there's economic downturn and they promise people better opportunities. If you come with me to this next country, it's really disgraceful. Another reason is the, unfortunately, UN peacekeeping forces and also the fall of communism. If you can track around the world in the late part of the 20th century, wherever the United Nations sent a peacekeeping force, there was a very sharp spike in the amount of sex trafficking to that region. And this has been one of the factors in Cambodia's history. I don't know if you're aware of their history. A lot of civil war, genocide, a lot of fighting. The United Nations came in the early 1990s as a peacekeeping force to help bring about stability. And suddenly sex trafficking within Cambodia, particularly in Phnom Penh, went through the roof. It's happened in Sierra Leone. It's happened Bosnia, if you've seen the movie The Whistleblower. Unfortunately, there is a correlation with that.
Demand for sex from UN workers.
Yep, demand for sex from UN workers, and also what's been a culture within the UN in those situations that, they need to blow off steam. They're just being men. They just need to get it out of their system.
Sorry, that would explain prostitution. It doesn't explain an increase in trafficking.
Well, because the increase in prostitution, there drives a demand for girls to be brought there, for more and more prostitutes, and that is where the demand for trafficking comes, for sex trafficking, because more people are wanting to go to brothels, use prostitutes, drives a demand, so people have to get them from somewhere.
Are the UN aware of this?
they're trying. Yep. There still hasn't been a difference in statistics yet, but they are very aware of it, and they are trying to change the culture within. Another big reason that internationally has driven the rise, particularly of sex trafficking, is the legalisation of prostitution, which is quite interesting when you're thinking about here in New Zealand. We have a problem with trafficking here as well. I was just saying to my colleague Amy on the way here that one of the things that really undid me a bit last year was getting to know a woman in Christchurch in her early 30s who had been trafficked for sex at the age of 17. She had been sold to the headhunters gang for 3 months and forced to live completely naked and service whoever came to visit. She was trafficked from brothels in Christchurch to Auckland to Wellington to the Gold Coast for 10 years. And this is Christchurch, and she's a Kiwi, and it totally did my head in. But she was involved in this scene during the legalisation of prostitution when that came into New Zealand. And she said, you know, it definitely has a result. They noticed once prostitution had been legalised here, suddenly there were a lot more rooms in brothels that had Asian women being kept and locked in. But because it's legalised, the police have no authority to go and to check. So it's a really difficult situation, and it's a pretty unpopular one to discuss in New Zealand.
Does the legalisation mean that the police get more ability to just go and check them against a checklist? I would have thought the police have more rights to go in once it's legalised, because here are the rules.
Well, they don't seem to. They seem to have less rights. We have a really strong prostitutes collective here who do a lot of really amazing work, looking after women. But they've been really protective and saying, well, why is the police coming into our workforce when you're not going into that insurance company and busting them? We've got just the same rights as them. You would think and you would hope. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. They don't see that there's much of a problem. Yeah. What was that? Sorry? Yeah.
Legalising prostitution, legalising drug dealing. From your experience, what impact has the one had?
I think what commonly seems to be happening is if you legalise something like prostitution, it becomes a lot easier to hide illegal activity behind it, and that's what seems to be happening. I'm assuming it's the same with drugs, but that seems to be what happens with prostitution. Yeah. Oh, it does. And it goes round and round and round. It's a really difficult conversation. Where me personally, yeah. I'm very strongly against the legalisation of prostitution because I have seen such a number of women absolutely damaged through it. I'm in the camp that sees prostitution as a form of violence against women. I don't think there's anything empowering about it. But there's a huge spectrum of views, and I have to be careful. That's my personal view. I won't speak on behalf of Tear Fund or Hagar with that. But I'll just quickly zip on here a little bit. We can come back and finish that discussion at the end. 3 of the main reasons people say, and are true with trafficking, is poverty, the lack of education, and cultural values, like they talked about in that video. But then, and I'm not going to go through all of these in great detail, when we unpack it even more, it's not even that simple. And this is one thing I hope that you do take away today, is that trafficking and slavery, it's not a simple issue. And because it's not a simple issue, there's not a simple solution. There's so many different components that make up this problem, so there's got to be so many different components to the solution. Things like gender, whether you're a boy, whether you're a girl, whether you're on the street, whether you've got a broken down family, whether you already got violence, whether there's poverty, religious discrimination. They're what we call vulnerability factors. And then on the other hand, you've also got demand factors. So you've got things just like greed, opportunistic people. Pornography is a huge problem, a massive problem, and that's a whole other issue in itself. If we want to do something about stopping trafficking and sex trafficking, we need to really address the pornography that's happening in our culture as well. Stuff like the supply chain and cheap labour. Another key thing. If we are serious about stopping this, we should stop buying clothes that's made in sweatshops. We've got to start asking some questions. Consumerism. It's a really, really difficult issue. Hagar does one piece of this pie, for want of a better word, and I guess this is something that, we've learned over the 20 years that we've been doing this, and I know this is something Tear Fund's really strong on too, is that you can't do these things on your own. We can only solve human trafficking and slavery, and I believe that we can if all the organisations do what they are equipped to do. So if Hagar's there and we're doing our bit, we're good at doing recovery and aftercare, we can help that bit. We can help with some government stuff. Invader are really good at doing rescue and that kind of thing. If they do their bit, Tear Fund are doing their bit, not only supporting our organisations, but helping at the other end by addressing some of these poverty and vulnerability issues through child sponsorships. There's lots of different organisations. If we all do our little bit, we're going to knock it off. And that also, I think, applies to us as individuals. If we want to see this stop, if we fundamentally think this is wrong, if you heard that story of Stray this morning and you thought that's horrific, then we all need to do our little bit, okay? I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Hagar, and then we'll dive into some other discussion. So we work with women and girls and boys in Afghanistan, Cambodia and Vietnam. In Afghanistan, we have found there that actually the biggest problem with trafficking is the trafficking of young boys. They have a cultural practice there called Bechabazi, where it is very common for young boys aged between sort of 6, 7, 8 to be sold to an older man who keeps him and trains him as a dancer, and he's kind of his toy boy, for want of a better word, trains them in the ways of the world and sexual activities, and then when they're about 13, 14, they can either go back home to their family or they're released to somebody else. So that's been a major challenge with us. We went to Afghanistan assuming it was going to be a little bit like Cambodia and women and kids, and actually, no, it's boys. A totally different ballgame. We also have a big boys program in Cambodia. Because of the number of foreign pedophiles that come to Cambodia, there is a huge demand for young boys as well, so we've been working with them too. But all our clients have experienced at least one of these. They've either been trafficked for sex or trafficked for labour. They've experienced domestic violence. A lot of our women have subjected to things like acid attacks, or they've been raped as children. And as you can appreciate, experiencing these kind of abuses leads to some pretty deep kind of trauma and a lot of deep sort of issues. We provide, like I talked this morning, high quality recovery services. One of the things that I think Hagar has learned, and this is something that Sue Taylor from the video developed, was when they went over and set up the aftercare home and were doing sort of standard sexual abuse counselling, they found within a very short space of time actually wasn't doing anything. It was just scratching the surface. It wasn't addressing any of the issues these kids have. So we got funding from Johns Hopkins University in the States, and Sue Taylor, this remarkable Kiwi woman, developed this program called Trauma-Informed Cognitive Behaviour Therapy that is specific counselling for victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation. And it addresses every single layer of abuse, the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, relational abuse, everything that they've experienced. It takes a long time. It goes really deep. But it's only by going deep that these issues are dealt with. There's a pretty horrific statistic out that if somebody who's been subjected to trafficking or exploitation, if they get rescued or if they escape and they don't receive deep, long-term quality care, there's over a 90% chance that they will end up being re-trafficked and going through it all again. So because it's this exploitation of vulnerability, we have to go really deep and address all these issues so that when someone comes out at the other end, which they do, They're going to be whole. They're not going to be vulnerable, and they're not going to be open and available to exploitation. And I just want to say, I think one of the things that I find most encouraging about Hagar is because we do this long-term stuff and we journey with clients, we actually do get to see the happy ending. It is possible. Some clients, it can take a couple of years. Last year in April, we closed the case of a woman who'd been with us for 16 years. You know, it took her a really long time, but she got there. And boy, did we celebrate. You know, it is possible to turn this around. It's not a hopeless situation. It just takes a lot of work. And I think one of the things that inspires me about Hagar, that's a really bad shiny photo of him, is that everything that we do now started with one man. And this guy, his name's Pierre Tami, and he's a Swiss man, and he was actually a diplomat posted to Cambodia in the early 90s, just after the United Nations force was there. And him and his wife were really disturbed with the amount of women that they could see being sold. And they were sort of talking a lot about this and what to do and just how wrong it was. And one night they were coming home from an event, and on the footpath near their home, they came across a woman who was unconscious. She'd been badly beaten, she'd been raped, and she was just left for dead. And they picked her up and they took her home. And they nursed her in their home until she healed physically. And then they kept her. She lived with them for quite a long time, and they talked with her. Pierre's wife was a counsellor, so she talked a lot with her with that. As she started to get, a bit more confidence, a bit more healing. Well, now what? Okay, well, now we need to help you find a job. So started with that. And right from the very beginning, this man with a really big heart to help was adamant that it's not enough just to give a bit of counselling. It's not enough just to help them on their way. We've actually got to make sure that at the end of it, they can stand on their own 2 feet. So for him, establishing businesses where women and kids can go and work or can learn employment is a huge part of it. And it started with one man helping one woman on a footpath. And when I get a bit discouraged and overwhelmed, which sometimes I do, I find this pretty inspiring because, as I said this morning, often we can just be so overwhelmed, we think we can't do anything. But one man has actually helped 15,000 women, and that's pretty amazing. So how do we do it? Our purpose at Hagar is singular. We just focus on one thing. We restore broken lives. And I think this is something that I was actually having a chat with a guy that popped in before and just saying how hard it is as a Christian, because everybody wants you to do something and the needs for so many areas are so great. You want to help everybody and you want to do everything, but the reality of it is you can't. And you often end up feeling guilty that you can't or saying no. But I want to encourage you guys, God's placed on your heart passions and desires and interests. Some of you, it will be for human trafficking. Above all else, for others of you, it might be, like my husband, climate change. We have interesting discussions there. But we can't all help everything, but we can all do something for someone. So Hagar's thing, we restore broken lives, and we often talk about this. Have you heard of kintsugi before? Here's your cultural bit for the afternoon. Kintsugi is a Japanese art form, and it was developed in the 15th century. And what it is that I think usually when something breaks and we glue it back together, the goal of us trying to do that is to make it look as good as it did before, or we try and make it look like it did when it was our favourite coffee cup. But in kintsugi, what they do is they acknowledge it's been broken, and they put gold dust into the resin. And when they glue it back together, you can't see it very well here, but you can see really clearly where the cracks are. And not only can you see them really clearly, but they're the most beautiful part of the creation. And this is something that, we try and think about it at Hagar. There's a better example. And this whole principle of kintsugi is sort of that the cracks are emphasised, the breaks are emphasised, but they believe that there's beauty in brokenness, that there can be incredible strength that comes out of being broken. And we see that over and over and over again with our clients. Ernest Hemingway said this, "Sooner or later the world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places." At Hagar, we also welcome the toughest of human conditions. We are known as the organisation that takes everybody that nobody else can fix. Particularly in Cambodia, I don't know, for those of you who've travelled there, there's so many organisations. You know, there's a lot of people working in this space, which is awesome. But we don't get cases of, there's been a woman and she was trafficked for, 3 months and now she's back and she knows where her family are and can you help her? It's like, well, actually, no, this person can, this organisation can. We get the cases of kids, of women who have been abused and traumatised multiple times, whose issues emotionally and physically are so bad, other organisations can't help them. And they say, right, Hagar. And that's where we kick in. We also work in 3 really tough conditions, tough countries. They're all countries that have broken histories in themselves. They're all countries that have got a background of long-term generational civil war. Cambodia's got a genocide. It's really difficult. All our country directors have had death threats. At the moment, our country director in Afghanistan is having to live in Dubai and work remotely because one of our clients in our shelter there at the moment is the niece of a man in the Taliban. And when they found out that Hagar was helping them, they put a contract out on our country director's head and she had to flee in the middle of the night. Our country directors in Cambodia and Vietnam have had similar. It's really tough. And the reason it's tough, not only we've got the Taliban in Afghanistan, but in Cambodia and Vietnam, these women and kids that we are trying to rehabilitate, they're worth massive amounts of money and lost income to their traffickers. So they will go to a lot of extent to try and get them back. We focus on individuals and their family. We also realised pretty early on, people don't heal on their own. They need community. Ideally, with their family. And if that can't help them, we'll help create a foster family or a different family and community. But people need each other. They need to be connected. Otherwise, they won't heal. And we do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to restore their lives. This guy here, Ritti, is a pretty amazing young man and a pretty amazing story. He's now 26, I think, and he's in his last year at medical school in Phnom Penh. But he had a really, really rough beginning. His mum died, his alcoholic mum died when he was 4, and he was left with his grandfather, who abused him, who exploited him, and Ritti ran away and ended up on the streets as a street kid, and he was into fights, he lived in a gang, he was sniffing glue. And for him, a real epiphany happened at the age of 10. He had a street mum, an 18-year-old girl, who had taken him under her wing, and she was pregnant, and she got really, really sick. So Ritti tried to take her to the hospital in Phnom Penh, but because he didn't have the $2 that it took to get in the door of the hospital, they wouldn't see them. And this woman died in his arms outside the hospital on the footpath. And this kid at age 10 had this epiphany, and he just was like, this is wrong. This should not happen to my people. I am going to become a doctor, and I am going to make sure that my friends do not die on the streets, said this 10-year-old glue-sniffing street kid on the streets. He got picked up by a human rights group who sent him to World Vision for 6 months before he came to Hagar. And this photo here was when he was at the World Vision Centre, and the kids there this day had to put their handprint and ink on a paper. They had to write their name, and underneath they had to complete the sentence, "When I grow up, I want to be." He says here in Cambodia, "My name is Ritti," and he crossed out the bit that said, "I want to be," and he said, "When I grow up, I am going to be a doctor." He came to Hagar when he was 12. And for 4 years, he ran away. And Hagar would spend days and weeks finding him on the streets. Really, we're not giving up on you. Bringing him back. He'd run away again. Hagar's staff would go and find him. We're not giving up on you, Riddy. Get back. Over and over and over until something happened. I don't know what it was when he was 16. And then he came to someone at Hagar and said, I want to be a doctor. Can you get me into university? And they were like, seriously? Whatever. And it turned out to be a Kiwi doctor from Paraparaumu. Doesn't get much more local than that, eh? Who heard about this 16-year-old Hagar kid who dreamt of being a doctor. And this doctor and his wife said, well, okay, if he's serious, if he's prepared to work and pass his exams at school, we'll fund him through medical school. So that's what this couple have done. They have sponsored him through university, through medical school. And he is now 26. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. And he's working as a doctor. And I met Ritty when I was over in October. He actually drove my friend and I home in his tuk-tuk that he saved up. And he bought this grotty old dungy tuk-tuk. But what he has done, he's still studying. But he has set up a ministry. He calls himself a mobile medic. And what he does 3 evenings a week is he loads up this tuk-tuk with medical supplies and he goes and he drives around the street communities in Phnom Penh and he gives them free medical care. That's the kind of heart that he's got. You know, and Hagar stuck with this obnoxious, difficult, runaway kid. And now he's going great guns. He is determined to make a difference, not only in his community, but in the nation of Cambodia. He's an absolutely remarkable young man and an absolute testimony that anyone's life can turn around. Anyone's life. He's involved in a church community there. One of the things that they do that we went to with them was in a slum community on the outskirts of Phnom Penh. Every Sunday afternoon they run a 2-hour kids program. They get 150 plus kids in, send them home with a carton of soya milk, some rice. Then their parents come and they have a 2-hour church service. You know, he's a remarkable young man. It's going really great. We do all of this for this reason, because we do believe every person, no matter how broken, should have the chance to be able to recover and live a full, productive and successful life. I want to finish just by sharing one story with you, one more story. What a terror. Might have to put your sunglasses on to see her properly, don't worry about me. But this is a young woman called Choi Yi that I had the privilege of reconnecting with in October. When I lived there in 2005 and 2006 and was involved with Hagar, there were 2 young girls there that had a massive impact on me. One was Srey that I talked about this morning, and the other was this young girl called Choi Yi. And she was in the aftercare home with her sister. Their stepfather had abused her and her sister for a long time, and he had been selling them to his friends and to people who came to the village so that he could get money. Both Choi Yi and her younger sister had come to Hagar. They were very, very damaged. But I absolutely loved her. She had such a spark. She's actually got, although her hair in that photo you can't see very well, is incredibly straightened. It's as curly as mine. And she had this real spunk and this beautiful smile. And she used to love singing. She used to really love God. And when I left Cambodia, these were the 2 kids that stuck in my mind. And I remember really clearly as I was leaving saying to God, you know, I'm going to dedicate my life to doing whatever I can so that kids like Choi Yi and like Srey never have to experience this stuff. So for me, it was a real turning point in my life changing from being a music teacher to this kind of stuff. So she's been a kid that stuck with me. I've often wondered how she was. Last year, I heard a story. A colleague came over from Phnom Penh and they they talk with me about Choyi. She's now 19. She's got fantastic English. And she wrote out part of her story. What had happened with Choyi? When she was 11, this brave little kid stood up in a Cambodian court and gave testimony against her stepfather. Because of her testimony, he was convicted of abuse, and he's still in jail. He got 20 years in jail. It was an incredibly brave thing to do. When she was 16, her and her sister were reintegrated back home. Hagar had spent a lot of time with the family, and they'd done just a lot of counselling with the family. They'd found that it was safe for them to go back. So Choyi and her sister had gone back home. And in this letter that Choyi wrote to us, she was saying, while it's great being back home, she loves being back with her mum. She missed her mum so much. It's really hard because she said, there's people in my neighbourhood who gossip about me. And when I go down the street, they look at me and laugh and say, there goes the girl with no future. And she was saying, but that is not true. I want to show them that I have a future. And she talked in this about her dream was to go to university so that she can look after her mum, she can look after her family, and she can go back to her village and show them, in her words, that she does have a hope and she does have a future and she does have value because of God. When I was over in October, I got to meet this young girl. She has just moved into a semi-independent home for ex-Hagar clients. She had just been there 3 weeks ago, or she just moved in 3 weeks ago. She had just started at university. She's studying international relations. And she's got big dreams she wants to get into. She wants to be a diplomat. She wants to work in an embassy. She wants to make change for people in her country. And I was wondering what it would be like. I was hoping I'd get to meet her, and I thought, here's this kid that had this massive impact on me when she was a 9-year-old, probably doesn't even remember me. And yet when she came down the stairs, she did this double take, and she went, boom, which is, what they call old women. Bong! You're here! And she came running up and gave me this huge big hug. And I was like, oh, Tracking. I said, do you remember me? And she went, yes, Bong. You sang and played, but you loved us. And I always prayed to God that you would come back so I could tell you how much you loved me. And I was like, an absolute mess. But for me, and I got to say to her, talk with her about how her life had been. At one stage she said to me just how hard it would been and about the times in her life that she felt she had no purpose, that she'd never be able to do anything with her life. She would never be able to make a difference. So I said to her, look, Choyi, you're one of the reasons why I work with Hagar. And she was like, what? And I talked to her about the impact that she had had on me, and because of her, I had decided to do this. And she was just like, but Bong, I thought my life had no meaning. I had no idea. She's a remarkable woman, and for me, I think it really just hit home to me that often we think with impacting others, with trying to solve issues, with trying to make a big difference, it actually is just about really simple things. It's about loving other people. It's about, like Tia Fun say, their thing, it's about putting our faith into action. One of the things I found with living in Cambodia was I couldn't speak much more Khmer other than what's your favourite colour, do you like dogs, how much is that? So when people would say to me, well, why are you here? Why are you here at aftercare? All I could remember to say was, Pre Jesus Rolanyak. Jesus loves you. It was like, oh, actually, that probably is why I'm here. And, but that to me is what this whole thing is about. It's about putting our faith into action. It's about responding to need and doing something about it. We've got a few minutes left. According to this, 55 minutes have gone. Have you guys got any questions? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Why did you call the organisation Hagar? I know where it comes from.
Yeah. Why? Pierre Tami called the organisation Hagar after the story of Hagar in Genesis 16, because Hagar is apparently the first documented slave in history, in Old Testament, in the Quran, the Torah, and also because in her story, like, she was sold from Egypt as a slave into sex or forced marriage, but when she was thrown out into the desert, she cried out to God, and God responded by saying, answering her prayer, and she says back to God, you are the God who hears me. And then a bit later on she says, you are the God that sees me. And for Pierre, one of the key things that he really believes in is that the first stage of someone's recovery is when they are seen. When someone looks into their eye and sees them as a person, and when someone hears their story, that's a huge step in recovery. So that's why Hagar with that. Yep.
What's the link between all of this and ISIS?
I have the answer to that. I put the wrong blurb in the book. Yes, I talk about ISIS, I think it's like tomorrow or something, and they put the same blurb.
Oh, did they? So sorry if you came here. Sorry if you came here thinking you were hearing about ISIS. I didn't realise that. The link with ISIS is the fact that they are being very blatant about the fact that they are kidnapping, abducting and forcing women into sexual slavery. And that, I think, is raising the profile, I guess, a lot internationally with that. And a lot of what we see in different contexts is happening with ISIS. We've actually been asked by a number of organisations to go and train organisations working with these women who have managed to escape, because they know Hagar's model works. They know the level of abuse the women imprisoned by ISIS have had. We don't at the moment work directly with them, but the issue's the same, the trauma's the same. It's all horrific. Yeah.
Janice, what impact did the American presence or Western presence, whatever, have either way on what you're doing? How long have you been working in?
We've been in Afghanistan since 2009. So it's after. And since the American forces have officially moved out, it's really dangerous for a lot of missionaries, a lot of foreigners now in Afghanistan are having to get out. What's happened to our country director isn't isolated. I think having the American presence there, for Hagar, it brought us a huge amount of funding because the US State Department funded a lot of what we did over there. They still are, luckily. So there was that aspect, but it also made it safer for foreigners to work. So we were able to set up, although we only have 2 expat staff, the majority of our staff there are Afghanis and Afghani women. So it enabled us to set up, but now that that's gone, it's become an extremely volatile situation. Really difficult.
Do you think it influenced the local culture at all?
What's that, sorry?
Do you feel there was any influence on the local culture?
Well,
at the American presence?
do you mean what Hagar did with influence, or?
What I mean is on the local customs and
Trying.
doing for hundreds of years. Has that
Well, it's a blip, isn't it? And I think that's one of the big challenges with all of this. How do you change a cultural standard? God is the only way. We face that in Cambodia as well. It's been really difficult for a small little part of the puzzle. We've had a bit of impact. And in, small communities and in parts of Kabul we have. Over the nation, hopefully we've started to change. One of the big changes, though, that we have brought in which is a cultural change of a different sort, is historically in Afghanistan, women were always the ones at fault. So if a woman was trafficked for sex, if she was raped, if she was abused, if anything happened like that, she was the guilty one. She was the one that was imprisoned. It had nothing to do with the man. She was the one at fault. So Hagar has spent a lot of time working with the Afghani government, with police, with immigration officials, training them on the fact that actually human trafficking victims are the victims. They're not the perpetrators. They're not the guilty ones. And it's been a difficult, time-consuming process. But last year we had a case where there was a woman who'd been brought back from Pakistan. She had been trafficked, and it came to a judge. She was supposedly going to go and be sentenced into jail for her misdemeanors, and the judge was, actually, you were trafficked into Pakistan. I'm not sending you to jail. I'm sending you to Hagar. And we were like, yes, finally. But, I think probably it's more starting to change rather than we've done it and it's all sweet. But the whole thing of cultural change, it's really tricky.
Do you look after these individuals in their own home, or do you have a building, or how do you cope with them?
Okay, it really depends on the individual and on their story to come there. For some people, we do. For some people, it is safe. For some people, their family, like there was a couple of girls in northern Vietnam that we had they'd been trafficked into Vietnam. They got returned to Hagar, and we started trying to look for their family, and it turned out their parents, these girls had been gone 18 months, their parents had been actively looking the entire 18 months for these girls. So we returned them almost immediately home, but with a Hagar support person who visited them every day for a long time. But because that was this, people need family, they need support around them. So if it can be, that's our first choice. But for a lot of the people that come to us, it's not safe. It could have been parents that sold them. It could be a dangerous community. So initially we have shelters where people can come to for a short time, and then we have foster homes for kids. We have group homes, kind of like flats and apartments, but they're still really, heavily accessed by Hagar. That's all right. Any other questions? You all look a bit dazzled. It's a bit heavy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do you preach the gospel to them at all, or?
Good question.
The gospel that's
Yeah, well, it's actually a really interesting one because Hagar staff's all Christian. We're a openly Christian organisation working in an Islam country, a Buddhist country, and a communist country. So it's really challenged. This faith in action thing takes on a whole new meaning for us because in every country it's different. In Afghanistan, we get a license to operate in Afghanistan, and part of that stipulates no proselytizing, no evangelizing, no mentioning the name of Jesus. But for some reason, most of the clients that come to us end up finding Jesus and finding faith. In Cambodia, we can be a bit more open, although it's Buddhist. Lots of Christian organisations, huge numbers of missionaries in Phnom Penh, and we have, Bible studies. We have church services. It's very open there, so we can. And my experience when I was there, I saw huge numbers of little kids coming to faith, not necessarily through anything that was told to them, but because they had amazing house mothers there looking after them who just showed them the love of Jesus every single day, every single night, rubbed their back when they were having nightmares and just always there, loving on them and showing them how much value they had. And it's like, I want that. I want to know that love. I want to know that sense of peace and security. And Vietnam's even more challenging. I didn't realise how communist it still is. And we have a license to operate there as well. We're one of a handful of Christian organisations allowed to work in Vietnam. And it is on the condition as well that there is no mention of anything to do with God, Jesus or faith. And that's stipulated in our licence. We get watched like a hawk. We have people coming in to assess everything. Yet again, faith just seems to be there and crop up, and it's part of the language, and, clients are finding faith. It's been a real struggle for us. We obviously have people in our organisation who are like, no, we need to get out and we need to be evangelising and preaching the gospel in words. But it's like, if we start doing that in Afghanistan and Vietnam, we're getting kicked out and we'll never be allowed in. And what happens to all these women and kids? So it's like, we won't do it openly, but we pray. And when I went over in October, I was actually going over with a colleague. I was going over to train our staff in music therapy and my colleague in art therapy. And I remember talking with a friend at church because she was saying, oh, you're going to be able to teach them Christian songs and everything we do in worship. And it was like, oh, I don't think so. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she said to me, Sarah, the Spirit of God is there anyway. You know, the Spirit of God is in the music and in the words that you speak. Whether you say Jesus or God, He's still there. You know, you can talk about Him. And boy, did I see that happening. You know, it's difficult. Within Hagar, we have huge discussions about all this kind of stuff. But, you know, for us, the most important thing is helping these women and kids. So, yeah.
I'm in admiration of the work that you and everybody does here, and just in awe of picked up. I guess, is this just one of those things that is always going to be with us? Because it seems to be, because it just seems like such a huge issue, and it's such a root of so many men. And it isn't like it's a thing that's just in Cambodia or just in Vietnam. It's a global phenomenon, you know, South America, wherever.
It's in every country.
On our doorstep. Is it just something that's going to always be with us, and there's always going to be a need for us to catch?
Well, I guess the easy answer is yes. But I'm a bit of an optimist or an idealist. And I'm probably a bit naive, but I think that it can be stopped, but I don't think it's going to happen quickly. I think it's really interesting how over the last sort of 5 years, this has really started coming to attention, even in the last 12 months in New Zealand. Suddenly it's actually in the media, and we're becoming aware of situations and stuff that's happening, and that's happening all over the world. It's like suddenly God's raising this up as an issue. He had been doing it amongst the non-Christian sort of sector, but it seems like God's really raising this up in the church around the world. And, you know, He's already won the victory. We just got to stand up and do the battle. You know, and a very idealistic look at it is say, you know, there's 21 million people in slavery. There's more than 21 million Christians. You know, but you're right, there is huge issues, but I don't think it can be stopped without God. I think underneath all of this stuff, it's a spiritual battle, and that's the level that it's got to be fought on, and that's the level it's going to win on. And when that battle has taken place, everything else is going to fall away, even though in the natural it's like, well, how can we do that when it's greed and it's this and it's that and it's so much a part of culture? I don't know. But my Bible tells me it can.
Are you working in Syria, Iran, Iraq?
No, we're not.
No hope.
We're not at the moment. One of the issues, and this will probably sound like a bit of an ask, but one of the issues that Hagar faces is that we're really short on funding. We want to move into Myanmar. We want to move into Thailand and support Invader. We want to be able to do that, but we don't have the funding at the moment to move in and respond to those things. So praying, but we've got to make sure we can afford to run what we run already. Go.
We've talked about the countries you're working in, but what are the countries that actually support Hagar?
Okay. New Zealand, Australia, United States, United Kingdom, Hong Kong and Singapore. Yeah. We're all small. There's only one full-time